Hi, hello, hi everyone. Hi, welcome. My name is Fisayo. I got my MBA at Arizona State University in 2022, and I'm here to welcome you all to the GMAT Club MBA application walkthrough. It's a 6-week series that covers applications to top 25 MBA programs. And we started this last week. So every Thursday and Friday for the next 5 weeks, we will feature admissions experts and admissions teams going step by step through every aspect of the online application. So be sure to check out previous videos on the channel if you missed them. And of course, please subscribe and engage in the comments. I really want to see where you're viewing this video from. So you can just put that in the comment section, where you're watching from, what country you're watching from. I'll be your host today, and in this walkthrough series, we're covering the Wharton School. Together with me is MJ. She's a senior consultant at Personal MBA Coach. MJ has helped many people with their MBA applications, and it's very exciting to have her on the channel today. So, welcome, MJ. It's great to have you. Over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for hosting me and Personal MBA Coach. I'm a director at Personal MBA Coach, and I did work as a director of MBA admissions at the Wharton School for about 12 years. I also was an assistant dean of MBA admissions and financial aid at UCLA Anderson, and I taught at a business school in Russia for a couple of years. I taught undergrads and MBAs, so I'm pretty familiar with the business landscape. So we're really happy to have you here. For those of you who don't know us, Personal MBA Coach was founded by Scott Edinburgh, who some of you may know, who went to MIT for his undergrad, has an MBA from Wharton, worked at Deloitte Consulting and other corporations prior to founding Personal MBA Coach, where he's been very successful, and we help people get into top business schools around the world. But we're not here to promote the school as much as we are to help you with the Wharton application. So let's get started. So if you look along the left-hand nav bar, here are the different sections of an application, which are pretty common across schools. There are some variations in terms of things that are asked by school, and there are also some nuances in terms of how schools handle different responses or different material. A lot of this is for demographic background, and then some of it is also included in your evaluation. The one bit of advice I would give all of you is that even though we're going to be doing a deep dive and kind of dissecting each section, when admissions people look at your profile, they read it much like a novel. They read it front to back and they go, wow, what is the picture that emerges? And that's why you might admit people with varying strengths, right? Somebody may have a really wonderful set of essays that are really genuine and authentic and reflective. Somebody else may just be a real academic guru and doing wonderful things at work. So Wharton does try to craft, like most MBA programs, a very diverse set of students that includes not only your professional background, but geography, and then some of the standard ethnicities. So let's get started. So in the biographical information, what you'll do here is pretty standard, right? You put in your first name, you put in your last name, a suffix if it's relevant. Then some of you, if you've been married or you've changed your name legally, will put in this other name first. And then if you have a preferred name, like a nickname, then you can put that in here. And the admissions folks know that's how you prefer to be addressed as opposed to your birth name. Then you put in your birth information, your country of birth, your citizenship status. And the status is kind of interesting because you can, in the status, if you're not, you can say you're a U.S. citizen, permanent resident, or a non-U.S. citizen. And then you can also have a dual country. So when schools are looking at your profile, they'll look at both of those as a part of your background and evaluating what you're going to contribute to the school. And some people have more than 2 citizenships. And so we would note that as well. Then you put in your primary address, and this address is where the school can reach you throughout the application process. And then contact information. You can give an alternate email address if you want. People often ask if they should use a personal email or a work email address. A personal one's good in case there are firewalls where you work and you may not get email, or if your work status changes, then a personal email assures that you can stay in touch with the school. Then you can also request to receive program updates. Now, at a place like Wharton, that really doesn't affect your chances of admission, but it's good to be on the mailing list because they'll give you updates about deadlines. They might give you admissions tips, information about activities going on at the school, so you can get more familiar with it. Okay.
MJ, I have a question. So
Sure.
someone is asking in the comments, does it help to have dual citizenship? What is the reason for asking about it?
Well, some of it's, like I said, for purely demographic reasons. Schools like to kind of compare the applicant pool versus the admit pool. And it also can be a proxy for how successful some of their marketing efforts are, like especially when you travel around to countries, knowing if it's a country maybe you want to recruit more heavily from or less heavily from. And if somebody's assessing your candidacy, let's say one of your citizenships is from a country that's not well represented, they might see that as a real positive aspect of your application. All right, and then there's more biographical information. Then we can go on to program information. And I've already filled this out here, but what you do is you select your program. It could be MBA, it could be MBA with a healthcare major, it could be MBA Lauder, or it might be another program offered by the school. And then under application information, they want to know if you are concurrently applying to another program. So do you want a dual degree? Like, it's not uncommon for people in an MBA program to say, well, I want to earn a law degree at the same time as an MBA, or I have one client currently who's applying to an MBA as well as a master's in a field of science because he's a healthcare guy. And then have you previously applied to Wharton? They do want to know there is no stigma attached to having applied before, and every year a lot of reapplicants are admitted. Then personal information, a lot of this is demographic, as I mentioned earlier. They might ask you, obviously, your marital status, your sexual identity or orientation. Are you been a member of the military? List your native language. That can be helpful when somebody assesses your profile. You're applying to an MBA, which is a professional program, so they don't always expect the same level of proficiency as if you were like going to become an English lit major or do something like theater where you had to be real proficient in the language. They want to make sure you can communicate well in class and that you can be an active member of the community, but they're not going to be very critical on that. And then they can ask you for family information, your general family information. You can choose not to answer, and that's fine. Parent or guardian, spouse or partner, children. Do you have any relations with people at the university? All of these just give a little bit of background information about you. So as they assess you, it just fills in a little bit more of a personal picture about who you are and not just a professional one. And if you have children, like let's say you apply, you have children, you're admitted, then they might connect you with a partners group where your partner can take the children and you can take the children to be involved in activities. Now, this one people ask about a lot. Do you have a family member, spouse to be, or domestic partner who's a graduate of the Wharton School? They do ask this, and it is different than undergrad when legacy admissions seems to be a really strong theme. And especially now, given a recent Supreme Court decision, Wharton has historically not used that as a deciding factor in admitting you into the school. But it's nice to know if people have ties, because sometimes that says a lot about their commitment to the school or even their knowledge. This also, in the next one, asks for community honors and recognitions. This could be like fellowships from undergrad. Were you Phi Beta Kappa, summa cum laude, cum laude? Were you on the dean's list? Or if you were involved in a nonprofit in the community and you received award for your volunteerism. So those are good to put in. They're not required, and a lot of people get admitted with them without having anything for those. This next one, you need to answer correctly. Then it says, have you ever been placed on probation, dismissed, or suspended from any college or university for reasons pertaining to academic and/or campus judicial integrity? If so, please enter a statement below. So you can enter a statement, stick to the facts. You don't need to tell a long story, go into a lot of details. But if you're not honest in this and the school happens to do a background check on you and you haven't told the truth, that means they could rescind your offer, or if they found out once you were in the program, you might be asked to leave. Because at the end of the application, the last section is a statement that you have to sign, which is a statement of integrity. And that means that everything you've submitted, to the best of your knowledge, is accurate. Sometimes people make a few mistakes here and there, but, and in my experience, this didn't hurt people from being admitted at all. All right, extracurricular activities and community engagement. Wharton is kind of interesting because it actually allows you to submit 10 different activities, or up to 10. When admissions looks at activities, they're not looking for a set number. They're not looking for a set number of hours that you contribute. They're trying to get a sense of, first of all, do you engage with your community? Do you have interests that lie beyond just you and what you do at work? They're also trying sometimes to see if you have leadership in any of these extracurriculars, and it can tell them a little bit about your interests. Sometimes you will see people with varied extracurriculars, which is fine. Sometimes you will see people with pretty common threads, like maybe they like to work with the homeless. And so a lot of their activities will be related to that. So fill these out. You put in the organization name. If you had a leadership position, great. If you didn't, you can say you volunteered. When you were involved, you can put the hours, and then you can give a little bit of detail about what you actually did in those activities. So this is a great way for admissions to know you beyond just your resume, the essays, and some of the background information you give biographically. So work experience. The first thing they ask you to do is submit a resume. And a couple of things about an MBA resume. Like professional resumes, it should really focus on outcomes and achievements as opposed to just describing your job. It should help give the scope and scale of a lot of things you've done. Ideally, in a perfect world, you would be able to quantify or show measurable results. It's not as possible in some jobs. It's not as possible sometimes earlier in your career than later, but you want to create a picture that tells somebody what you actually did and how you contributed to the firm. Unlike a resume for a job application, you can also put some select extracurriculars from undergrad here. MBA admissions people know that once you start working, you tend not to be as involved in extracurriculars, so they're just looking for general patterns and trends. The next question is area of interest after an MBA. So you need to identify, to the extent that you can, try to find the closest match you can, the general industry that you want to work in once you graduate. There is an option of other. A lot of this is for data tracking because you will give a lot more detail when you go into your short-term and long-term goals in one of their essays. So here they ask for employer information. And if you click on select an employer, there's a whole list. You'll see a big list. And if it doesn't show up, again, you can do other. And then this allows you to do up to 4. Your resume may show more than that. And then next you can do professional awards, honors, and recognition. These should be significant professional awards and not just something that is not real meaningful. So for example, when I used to look at a lot of applications from the military, they seems like they give an awful lot of awards to people in the military. So we would always tell those candidates, pick something like the Purple Heart, the Bronze Award, an award of honor that is notable and significant. And again, if you don't have any of these, that's absolutely fine. Then you can upload your resume here. And the next item says, please upload in a Word document any additional employment listings you have. So those can be beyond what you listed in the text fields above, or even in addition to your resume. Schools typically prefer a 1-page, 2-page max resume. And certifications, you don't have to have these, but for some industries, like if you're working in accounting or finance, to have some of these professional certifications just bolsters your profile in that area. You don't have to have done it, however.
MJ, let me take you back on the extracurricular activities bit. So somebody in the comments is asking, so they say that they're a healthcare worker, a healthcare provider. So their job is basically community based and they're active in extracurriculars, but these revolve around family and personal time. So will Wharton view that negatively?
No, not at all. So you'll find, for example, in certain populations, you'll find that people don't do as much extracurricularly. And even sometimes on applications, you'll see that maybe somebody's very active with their family. Maybe they're very active in religion or something like that. That also rounds out their profile. So no, that would not be a disadvantage. And frankly, if you were like working up on an application right now and you suddenly joined quite a few activities, which has happened in the past, that doesn't look good either. Great question.
Thank you.
And I think we finished work, so let's go on to academics. I really want to make you fill this out because whenever you're not completing a page, they give you prompts.
MJ, would you like me to take the questions as we're going along, or do you want us to take the questions afterwards?
Oh, you can go ahead while we're yeah.
Okay. Okay. So there are more questions.
Sure.
So somebody says, does it matter which industry we say we want to go to post MBA? I'm guessing there's a bigger number of investment banking consultants who want to go to Wharton. Will that affect the evaluation?
Will that affect the what?
The evaluation.
And so they want to go from where to where?
So, okay, so this person is saying that they're actually guessing that a lot of people who want to get into the business school would be putting in that they want to go to investment banking or they want to be consultants. And if that's not what they are looking at, is that going to affect them in any way?
No, not really. So what happens is you're absolutely correct. Your assumption that a lot of people going to MBA programs either are coming from like finance, investment banking, or consulting. Quite a few are not, or they want to go into it. We can talk about this a little bit more when we look at essays, but schools are looking a lot at how well thought out your decision is. Is it realistic? Like if you've never worked in finance and you think that coming to an MBA and studying finance is going to qualify you for investment banking, it's probably not. So they look at how realistic your goals are. And if they're realistic, then you get fair consideration. And that, again, is just one part of the application. So they don't separate applicants out by industry, because if you look at the entire application, a lot of stuff just kind of shakes out. And so then the rest that you're left with based on the whole profile mean that plenty of people with that goal get admitted.
Right. There's another one. So on the resume bit, the person says what kind of documents or what kind of additional documents is typically expected to be provided in the second document, please, on the resume.
The second upload?
Yeah.
That would be, it's rare that you would provide anything more than what is on your resume, but occasionally you find people who do. So I would say for most of you, that's not going to apply. That would be for people who've had longer careers and they can't fit it all on like 1 or 2 pages. And if they can't fit it on the resume and they can't put it in the fields that you have to put text in, then you would do it then, but that's very uncommon. Okay, so the next one is academic background. They do ask you high school, secondary school, prep school, and if you had academic awards like we mentioned earlier, like Phi Beta Kappa, Phi Kappa Phi, and again, if you don't have them, that's okay. And then they want to know where you studied and earned your baccalaureate, who conferred the degree. Sometimes people have 1 degree, sometimes they have 2. And so it's good to put that information in. And they may, as part of a verification process, verify what you submitted. So when you apply, you do need to upload transcripts for all of your schools. And if you went on exchange or you transferred from one school to another, you still need to have transcripts for all of the institutions that you attended. They don't have to be official at the time you apply, but if admitted, then you'll need to submit official. And the next one can say other, says additional college information. So you may have other history, like for example, let's say your profile academically doesn't have as much quant as you would like in it. Maybe you took a course or 2 to help bolster your quant profile and you took calc or stats, you could include that there. Oh, and also under academics too, I think it asks you what your GPA is. If you studied in a US institution on a 4.0, that grades on a 4.0 scale, you would submit that. But if you're from outside of the US, you do not convert grades. And schools are generally very aware of schools around the country, how they evaluate, and usually on your application, if it's not a letter grade or a 4.0 GPA, it might be like first class honors, second class honors. Maybe it's on a 10-point scale, but you don't convert. And when I was at Wharton, we used to have this big, big binder with information about schools from all around the world. So we knew how strong they were academically, what fields they were good in, how they assessed candidates, and how to measure relative performance. And alumni around the world were really helpful in helping us get all that material in. And I even remember once we admitted somebody from a university I had never heard of in Florida. And I looked up, and it was a great applicant, and I looked up the university and it said it was accredited. And I'm going, okay, he did well. The rest of his profile is great. And we admitted him, which highlights the fact that you don't have to necessarily have worked at a big name firm, have gone to an Ivy League school to get admitted. If you did well wherever you have worked or gone to school, that's the key thing that admissions looks at. Okay, recommendations. So recommendations are always kind of interesting. What happens is you will go into the application and you will enter the name and email address of your recommender. And then they will get a link that they can then click on, and it will list all of the recommendation questions that they would like you to answer. There's a lot of overlap between Wharton and other schools, but it does have some of its own specific questions. And you need to submit 2 recommenders. And the recommenders you want to select are people who just know you very well, who are going to write you awesome recommendations, who are like your champions. That is more important than having somebody with a title. I've seen CEOs write recommendation letters where it's real clear they don't know the person they're recommending. That's not very helpful for the applicant. And one key thing to notice here is they ask, right below the first name of the recommender, last name, and email, do you waive the right to examine the letter of recommendation? It's always good to say yes, because then admissions is more confident that the recommendation is genuine and authentic. And one question we often get about recommendation letters too is, should you be writing them for your recommender? And I would strongly say no. When admissions sees recommendation letters that sound like the essays, then that calls into question the integrity of the applicant. There are certainly a lot of things you can do to guide the recommenders, and we certainly do a lot to help guide them, whether it be your resume, reminding them of things that you've accomplished, projects you've worked on with them.
Question from Fatma here. So she says, what are they looking for the second recommender essay? What do you think this person will be successful in their career? How does it differ from the first question?
I'm sorry, what was the first and the second question?
So the person says, what are they looking for the second recommender essay? i.e., why do you think this person will be successful in their career? How does it differ from the first question?
And can you remind me what the first question is? I apologize, I don't remember offhand.
I don't even see it here.
I could tell you what the second one is, though. The second one, so when people assess candidates, they're looking at management and leadership experience you've had to date and or your potential going forward. So this question is forward-looking, and it's asking, where can they see you in the future? Like, let's say you have not had a lot of opportunity at work to do direct management or supervising of people, but maybe you're really good at motivating people. Maybe you're good at influencing others to help achieve different objectives that you want to achieve in a work setting. They're often talking about where they can see you, what your potential is, and some of the skills, soft and hard, that you bring to the table.
Interesting. Thank you. Another question from Madison. So they're asking, how many words do you recommend for each recommendation question? My recommender asked me, and she said there was no word limit.
Well, if a school, I don't think they specify the length. There's no exact length. I think content should always rule. The key is there should be, the recommender should be providing examples to support general statements that they make about you. You could have them write 200 words, give or take some. And I would say just see how the content works out, but they need to give a clear description and examples to support things. Like to say that you are the best employee they've had in 25 years and you're a leader among all your colleagues doesn't tell us anything. Some examples then that would back it up would be very helpful. So schools aren't looking for a set number of words. And as you all know, some people write more succinctly, some don't write as succinctly, but more is not always more. So they should not be writing a bunch of additional information just to make something longer. So when a school like Wharton doesn't recommend it, probably around 200 is not a bad rough number to start with. And also it depends on the nature of the question, because some are clearly short answer. Does that help?
I believe so. So I just have a few more questions here. Is it okay for me to read them out? Okay, so Sam is asking, will they contact your previous employer?
Will they?
Yes, will they contact your previous employer?
They might. So it depends. They will often do random background checks of people, justify the accuracy of things that are on your application. Like, let's say a recommender writes something and the email looks a little suspicious, they might check it out. Or they sometimes just randomly pick people and they will verify things like job dates, job salary, bonuses, verify that the email address actually is connected to the name of the person who's recommending you.
Okay. Okay. There's this question here. So someone's asking, can the letter of recommendation be in bullet points instead of paragraphs? I believe it should be in paragraphs.
Yeah, I agree with you. Paragraphs are ideal, and bullet points often then end up losing a lot of context and a lot of the supporting evidence to, they end up just being like a laundry list of things you've achieved. So, and a recommender doesn't have to be a great writer, by the way. Somebody asked me this earlier today, a client I'm working with. If somebody really likes you and they're a fan of yours, even if their mastery of English isn't great, or they're just not, that side of their brain isn't their strength, it's still really clear to admissions that they endorse you, and the examples will support what they have to say. So if somebody's uncomfortable with writing, still have them write out paragraphs, and you're not going to be held liable for somebody's writing style.
I have another question that is not related to this recommendation. So this is Francis, says, does Wharton consider partly attained CFA program? So let's say completion of level 1 or level 2, as well as the CPA equivalent. So they're asking if Wharton considers if you have achieved or attained level 1 or level 2 of the CFA, or if they consider the CPA equivalent to a particular country's certificate exam.
They consider all levels. I mean, obviously, to go beyond the CFA 1, it's more difficult, but they look at all of them. So you don't have to complete it everything. So they'll look at all of those that were mentioned.
Okay.
Well, it doesn't want me to move on. So we'll talk a little bit about the essays while I try to get it to move. It doesn't want to for whatever reason. So with the essays, Wharton is very pragmatic. They're very straightforward. Their questions are very dry, non-emotional. And like on your resume, you have to remember in the application, you're going to feel constrained. So always answer the question asked. And don't try to throw in a lot of extraneous information. Well, Since it's not letting me go on, I'll just walk through the essays. So the first essay for Wharton is very straightforward. It's asking you why. Here, I'll pull it up on another site.
Okay.
And Wharton does have strict word limits, so you don't want to go over them, and you can't go over them in the application. So we'll look under application requirements on the website, which is great because they have everything there that you need. So here are the two essays. So the first one is, how do you plan to use the Wharton MBA program to help you achieve your future professional goals? You might consider your past experience, your short and long-term goals, and resources available at Wharton. So one of the biggest mistakes people make in an essay like this is they spend way too much time walking through their past experience and their career path to date. It's kind of like in an interview. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Walk me through your resume. You go through you don't repeat everything in your resume, but you're explaining kind of your path. Like, I started out as a data analyst. Then I moved up to a senior data analyst. Then I moved up to this role. Maybe you would explain why you moved from one company or industry to another. The main focus should be on your short-term goal, which is, what do you want to do after an MBA? What kind of role do you want to have, like a title? What kind of industry? And maybe if you know a firm or two, you could mention them. Like, let's say you want to do consulting. You could say, I want to be a senior consultant doing healthcare consulting at a firm such as Deloitte or Ernst & Young. Then long-term, what do you want to do? So someone in that instance might say they want to stay in the firm, move up to becoming like a managing director, or they might want to say that I want to take the experience that I've gained in consulting and the exposure that I've gained to corporations on these different projects and move to the corporate side. I want to move into operations, become a manager or director at a pharmaceutical firm such as Merck or whatever. The key is, whatever your goals are, you need to connect all of them, right? So how does the experience you've had prior to the MBA, plus what you learn in an MBA, which could be knowledge or skills gaps, such as like leadership or finance or strategy or operations, how are those going to prepare you for your short term and then to your long-term goal? One of the biggest mistakes people make is they become very idealistic, very broad, and schools want you to have a clear focus based on what you know now. Things may change once you're in a program and you're learning a lot and making connections, but they don't want you to get into a program and spend 2 years running around in different directions and then graduating and still not knowing what you want to do. So this is as much for your benefit as it is for the schools. The second one is, it's basically taking into consideration your personal, professional, and or academic background. How do you plan to make, and this is key, specific, meaningful contributions to the Wharton community? So some people, it could be, you can often start with something overarching, like maybe you've lived in several different countries and worked in different settings. That might be something you would bring to classroom discussions with your teammates. Maybe you've been a consultant. This is a little trite at this point. A lot of people do this, but maybe you want to join the consulting club and help prospective students who want to go into the industry prepare for case interviews or things like that. I have a client who said he's been a hockey player most of his life, and he wants to join the Wharton Wild Men, which also includes women hockey team, and move them into the Western Philadelphia community to help teach kids how to play hockey. And these don't have to be, so these can be personal, they can be professional. I had one client who wanted to go to the wine club and bring in some people he knew who ran wineries and teach them a lot about some of the real subtle nuances of different types of wines from different regions. Then this next essay is optional. It truly is optional. And this is what we used to call, when I worked in admissions, an extenuating circumstances essay. The only time you really should be using this is like maybe you have an unexplained gap in your work and you want to explain how you spent your time. Maybe you got off to a rocky start in undergrad. It's not unusual. Sometimes people have a bad semester or two before they end up doing well. So you could highlight an upward academic trend, or maybe a choice of recommenders. Maybe you think the admissions committee might wonder why both of them weren't professional, and maybe you chose one from a nonprofit organization that you work in because you've had lots of opportunities to demonstrate leadership, be very active, and illustrate a lot of the qualities that MBA programs are looking for. So that's what it should be used for. It shouldn't be used to think, oh, geez, I wish they knew this thing about my personal life, or I wish they knew about this activity that I'm in and I want to share more information than I shared elsewhere in the application. So they're pretty straightforward. There's really not a lot of words. There used to be a time when we would have like 1,500 to 3,000 word essays. So, and maybe that was easier. Sometimes it's harder to write things that are more succinct, but it's pretty straightforward. And I really like that approach that Wharton has.
And we have a suggestion in the comments. So for the screen that is stuck, someone is suggesting that you go back to a separate section and save the page. Perhaps that work.
Oh, thank you. Well, let's try. So then we probably go back to academic.
Yes. Did it work? Save.
Nope. Go back to work, then let's go back one more. Certainly worth a try. Could be I have to fill in some of this required stuff at least early on in the app.
Perhaps.
Because I know I had the same problem earlier and I ended up starting an app. Okay, so there are the essays. So thank you. Looks like it worked.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you. And then we'll go to test information, the dreaded tests that most of you don't like. Yeah, it just bounced me back. Let's try this again. Okay, so with the tests, you can take the GMAT or the GRE, and they're both fine. They're both acceptable. Some people do better on the GRE than the GMAT. And the two, when the schools look at them, they don't convert like the results of one test to the other. And when you look at the schools' profiles, their GMAT usually is around 732, something like that. But that's just an average, and there's a wide distribution around it. And when Wharton looks at your academic profile, they're looking at your test score in conjunction with your academics. And when they look at you academically, they might look at the strength of your major, whether or not you took quant courses. So you might have a strong test that you did well on, particularly on the quant section, that can offset an undergrad degree, for example, where you didn't do much with calc or stats or anything. You might have done really well over 4 years and you just don't test well. So they take all of that into consideration, and they will always look at your highest total score. Then if you're a non-native English speaker, you can request a language test waiver, and that can be based on maybe you conduct business in English, or English is spoken very commonly and widely in your country. Then you can also submit either the TOEFL, the PTE, or the IELTS. Any one of those is fine. And then the last section is this ethics code and statement of integrity that you're required to fill. And anyway, this ethics statement is basically you're stating that the information you submitted to the best of your knowledge is accurate. And if they should decide to randomly do a check, they'll often let you double check your application just to make sure there are no honest mistakes. And they're not really looking to find faults. Like, let's say your salary was off by $1,000. They're probably not going to penalize you for that. Sometimes people forget the month and years they started. And so if your start date or your end date of a job is off a month or two, that's not really going to hurt you. But I can tell you what I saw when I was at Wharton that hurt a candidate. So on the education section, you need to report all of the education that you have had post high school. And so we had an applicant apply once who had a law degree, and she kept thinking the law degree would hurt her chances of admission, which is absolutely not true. And the school found out when she was during the program, and she was asked to leave. So that's rare. I don't know of any other time that happened, but that's why it's important to be honest. And if you think of admissions, they use a very different filter than like a job, right? For a lot of jobs, they're trying to screen you out. You don't have certain skills, you don't have certain experiences, but from an admissions point of view, they're trying to find reasons to admit you rather than deny you. And that's why you have a huge diversity of people in the class, and something that makes you a really great candidate wouldn't be the same for somebody else. So you might really be incredibly involved in the activity, and you just have this strong compassion for giving back to others. Maybe you really are really, really good at finance, and that could be something that could differentiate you. Maybe you just have some really interesting and unique goals. It also could be as simple as you read your essays, and maybe the rest of your profile is fairly standard, but your essays have this real ring of authenticity and being genuine to them. Because I can tell you, having read thousands and thousands of applications over a number of years, that there were times you would read essays that, like I mentioned earlier, sounded suspiciously like the recommendations, or you meet the person and they don't sound at all like their essays, or they don't even remember some of the content they wrote in their essays. I even had a candidate once from a foreign country. So I lived in Russia a couple of years, and they're wonderful linguists. And I know mistakes that linguists make, like prepositions and things that even native speakers struggle with sometimes. And there was an applicant who was an amazing applicant, and he had like a 67% verbal score on his GMAT, and his essays were brilliantly written. And I just knew that there's no way he could have written those on his own. And so when you have assistants, editing is one thing, but it should still preserve your own voice. How are we doing on questions?
We have a lot of questions. I was just waiting for you. Okay, so GRE or GMAT, is there really no preference of GRE or GMAT over GRE? Sure, you've answered this already. So.
You know, it's a great question. And I'll be honest, early on, the GMAT was designed for the MBA. And at one point, the GRE wasn't viewed quite as favorably, but then they got more and more dual degree applicants. And so they started accepting it. And if they really thought the GMAT was that much preferable to the GRE, they wouldn't offer it. And because it's not an absolute measure and it's looked at in terms of your academic background and maybe even work you do professionally, the differences in them don't matter so much. It's just to give one more data point in terms of your abilities. So take either one. They wouldn't say both are fine if they weren't fine.
Okay. Another question. Sounds like Wharton leans heavily on quant classes and scores. Do people with engineering backgrounds have an advantage by nature?
Well, it is a quant-based school. All MBA programs are, but that doesn't mean that you even necessarily have to have a real strong quant background. What they're looking at is once you get admitted, are you going to be able to handle it? Certainly engineers have the kinds of skills that make them successful, but that's just one part of your application, right? So if you're an engineer who's moved into project management or has a role where they're not just sitting at their desk and doing coding or programming, then that would be a great MBA applicant, or an engineer who clearly knows why he or she wants to make a transition into something new, as opposed to I'm just bored and I want to find something, my next step.
Okay. So someone says, does Wharton compare your GMAT score with respect to others in your demographic, or just to the cohort as a whole?
Well, it's kind of interesting because they don't really, if you think about it, there's so many ways you can kind of slice and dice the pool. Some people go, oh, well, you're going to look at me by my country and my region first. Oh, well, I'm a consultant, so you're going to compare me with all consultants. Or I'm a female, you're going to compare me with all females. There's so many different ways, and that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier. What happens is when you read all of the applications and you look across all of the areas, a lot of that shakes out in the end, and who you're left with admitting actually has a nice broad cross section. So you're really not.
Okay. So Manson's asking, can you talk about the EA score for the Wharton Exec MBA?
Yeah, so the EA was designed for executive MBAs, and every school is a little different in terms of what they're looking for. If you call the EMBA office, most of the EMBA programs will say schedule an appointment with the admissions officer, and then you can take the test and run the score by them. And again, it's not an absolute score because it all depends on what you've been doing at work and your academic profile. I've seen people get in with like 153. I've seen people get in with 160, and I don't have a broad sample, but I know there's a nice range. So just do the best you can.
Okay. Question from Dr. Suzuka. I run my own business for about 3 years now. Who would you suggest to choose as a recommender?
That's a great question. Wharton gets a lot of people who run family businesses or they've started up their own business. Obviously, a good choice could be like a client. Maybe you work closely with a client, maybe an investor. The key is somebody who knows you really, really well and can talk about your business acumen, management skills, leadership skills, maybe your ability to negotiate contracts or something. So those would be good options.
Okay. So another question here on the GMAT bid. So someone says, if your GPA is 2.4, will a strong GMAT score help? What should be the GMAT score if the GPA is around 2.4?
Well, if you have a 2.4 GPA, I don't know what your major was or what courses you took. One thing that we often recommend with clients with lower GPAs is take a course at an accredited university for a letter grade. So you know your relative performance versus everybody else in the class. Take it like in calculus or statistics, or definitely retake something that you didn't do well in, one of those in undergrad. Then do well on the GMAT, and then that can make a big difference in your candidacy.
Okay. Param is asking, is it okay if both LORs are from academic areas instead of professional? Is there a preference?
Generally, you want a professional recommendation because we already know about your academic performance. You're not coming to go work in something where you're going to work on a master's degree where some of your academic research abilities and talents would be required. If an academic person has never worked with you professionally or any capacity where they could observe the skills that an MBA program is looking for, then they're not the best choice.
Thank you. There are more questions. You want me to continue or?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So someone says, has Wharton admitted students with lower than average GRE score? Wharton's average is 324.
What is the average what?
No, so they're asking if Wharton has admitted students with lower than the average GRE score.
Yes, all the time. So when you're looking at averages, if you look at the distribution around them, it's pretty broad. And those are published in a lot of the rankings that you can see for business schools. And I always tell people, like, schools don't drive these averages. All of you as applicants do. That is simply an average or median point. There's a wide range of scores around that. And that works to your advantage in the application process.
Okay, fantastic. So do people with data and analytics background have an edge over IT engineers?
Well, that's a little bit like the other question we had earlier about engineering. So if you're an Indian male who studies IT or is an engineer, you're right. It's going to be a little more difficult and more competitive for you because Wharton probably could fill 80, 90% of the class with people with your profile. So it's incumbent upon you to make sure that a lot of the other areas of your application that could differentiate you are strong.
Okay. So military question here. From military applicants, how have you seen individuals best translate their work experience to the civilian business sector?
Many different ways. And you're right, it's tough, right? You're in the military, you want to work in the public sector. I've seen some people say, well, I think I want to go work in consulting and I want to work on projects with the Department of Defense. As long as you can show that it's related to either your military experience, some other experience you've had, or it's well reasoned, then you'll be fine with it. And it's a little tougher coming from the military, but in general, Wharton and a lot of MBA programs love military people because you end up with a lot of great leadership skills coming out of the military.
Okay, question from Alisa. She says, are there any areas in the application that you think applicants undervalue?
That's a great question. I don't think so. I think the biggest mistake I see is they're micromanaging it, or as Scott Edinburgh, our founder of Personal MBA Coach says, you're over-engineering it because everything kind of hangs together like a story. And that's the biggest mistake I see people making, or trying to get into the heads of the admissions committee and thinking that they know what the admissions committee wants when admissions is very, very diverse. When I worked at Wharton, we had somebody with an EDD degree, somebody with an MBA, somebody who didn't have an advanced degree, somebody who'd worked in the private sector, somebody who worked in the nonprofit. So other than that, no, I don't really see any particular area undervalued.
Okay, we're almost at time now, so I'm just going to read out one more question. So is the criteria for the EMBA similar to the MBA? Why does Wharton not offer the healthcare track on the EMBA?
I think that would be a great question for the EMBA office. If you look at the essays, they're pretty similar. There's a little difference. With the EMBA program, they're looking for people who are more senior and people who are not looking for the same kind of career services and career support that you would be in a full-time program.
Okay. Do you have any closing remarks? Well, everyone, please make sure you hit like on this video. Please make sure you hit like. And after this session, you can also drop your comments, your questions in the comments, and somebody from the team will respond to you in the comments as well if you're not able to get your questions answered right now. But please don't forget to hit like and to subscribe.
Yeah, and what I'd like to say is I wish you all good luck in the journey. If you have questions, you can email me mj@personalmbacoach.com or Scott. And many of you are probably well into your application process, or maybe even a few of you finished it or close to finishing it. But we do offer interview prep for Wharton, and it's group interview process. If something like that would be of interest to you, we do emulate exactly what they do. But thank you for being here. You had great questions, and thank you for putting up with some of the technology issues, but it was a pleasure to be here today, and thank you for facilitating this.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. All right, see you guys next time. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye.